Hi everyone, and welcome to this Bonita Soft webinar. My name is Talia Cruz, and I'm Bonita Soft's community evangelist. And it is a great pleasure for me to welcome our special guest, Thomas Allweyer. He is a process management specialist and a professor of enterprise modeling at the Kaiserslautern University of Applied Sciences in Germany. He holds an engineer's degree from the University of Stuttgart and a doctorate from the Saarland University in Saarbrücken. Sorry for my German. Before he became a professor, he worked as a product manager and consultant for a software vendor and as a process manager for a procurement platform provider. Thomas has published many papers and several books, among them a bestseller, Introduction to BPMN, the standard for business process modeling. And this is one of the topics that we are going to talk about today. So hi, Thomas, and thank you for being here with us today.
Hi, Talia. Thanks for this introduction, and thanks for the chance to be here and talk a little bit about BPMN, of advanced BPMN concepts. I'm using BPMN for process modeling and especially also for process execution in my courses at the university. And I have created a lot of small models for explaining different BPMN concepts to my students. So I'm going to present a few of them because I think when you really use the more advanced features of BPMN and you use them really for executable models and you try to execute them, you learn a lot about BPMN and about the underlying concept. So why BPMN? What is cool about BPMN? It's just a kind of flowchart notation, maybe, but it isn't that simple. I think what's really important about BPMN and why we should use BPMN, it facilitates the communication between business and IT. I mean, there's always this gap between business and IT, and you have other notations like UML and things like that that are more, only for one of the two worlds, more for the IT world. So BPMN, I find, is really used by business and by IT. So it's really a common language. And what is also important, it's an accepted standard, not only a standard. There are so many standards out there, but there are a lot of standards that are not really used, and they are not really useful in this case. But BPMN is really used by all the software vendors like Bonita Soft and also by many users, and we teach it at the universities. So therefore, we really have that common language. And it's not only a graphical notation, but we also have this defined execution semantics. So if I model something in BPMN, then I have a good chance that different BPM systems will execute the model in the same way, more or less. There are smaller differences, but in general, they are interpreted in the same way. Well, and I think it has a very high expressiveness. You can also model very complex cases and execute them. And I find that most of the cases you run across when you try to define models, you can and processes you can model in BPMN. So therefore, it's really a very powerful language. And well, I'm going to talk about some advanced BPMN concepts, 3 concepts. The first one will be subprocesses and call activities. They're not only for creating process hierarchies, like many people think. Then the second topic is loops and multi-instance activities, where you can work on collections of items sequentially or in parallel. And the third topic will be message flow and process collaboration, where you can make independent processes work together. And all this, not only the model, but also a little bit about the execution and what you need to define in order to make these models executable. So let's start with sub-processes and call activities. Here we have a little process without a sub-process. It's about an inquiry and some quotation or proposal that is defined. You have several steps in here, and if the proposal is not okay, you jump back and so on. And at the end, the price must be defined. So here we don't have a sub-process, but we want to have these details in a sub-process. So we want to replace this part with a sub-process. Actually, Bonita also has a feature where you can select a few elements and then say, I want to turn this into a sub-process. So you get some support for doing this. And the result is here. Here we have the process in the upper part. And here in this process, we have this activity prepare proposal with a little plus sign. And here's the detailed process with the details that we have just seen in the entire process model, but now they have been moved into a separate process model. And this process model is connected, so it contains the details of prepare proposal. And when we execute the process, when the process arrives at prepare proposal, then we jump into the sub-process, and the sub-process will be executed, define product details, define service details, and check proposal contents. If it's not okay, we jump back here. And when it's finally okay, then the sub-process here is entirely finished, and we jump back to the original process, to the parent process. We can distinguish, or BPMN in their standard distinguish between real sub-processes. And a real sub-process is a part of the parent process. You can't use it without the parent process. It has direct access to the parent process's data. And besides the real sub-process, we have also that thing that is called call activity that actually calls another process. And in this case, since it's not a real sub-process, it's not a part of the parent process, but it's a separate process that will be called. Therefore, this called process doesn't have access to the data of the original process. So we need to pass data, and we need at the end return data to the parent process. So this is basically like a function call in a programming language. And here we see that we have separate data definitions in our parent process and in the called process. So Bonita, for example, only has call activities and called processes because this is a more general and powerful concept, and you can basically do anything that you can do with subprocess as well, but you have to define the data to be passed and returned. So in Bonita, we need to, for such a call activity, we need to define the process to be called, detailed proposal. This is this process. And we have to define the data that are passed from the root process to the called process. So this is here. We assign the contents of a business variable to a business variable in the called process. And for receiving data back, in this case, I didn't need to define anything because I have used Bonita's concept of business variables. This is a specific concept from Bonita. And in this case, we have a reference to the actual data. So when we change anything in the called process, it's available everywhere where this is used. If we had normal simple data types, then this would be different, and we would need to define data to receive back from the called process to the original process. Yeah, when we execute such a model, then here we have the list of the processes, and we can start the parent process. Well, and since we see the first thing that happens when the inquiry is captured, then we have that call activity. So that means we directly jump into the called process, and the first task is the task define product details. So this is the instantiation form to start the process. We need to enter customer email and so on. We submit that, we jump directly into the sub-process, or the called process to be more precise. So the first task of the sub-process appears in the task list, define product details. This is the task that is the first task in the called process. So here is the form to work on this task, and well, like this it's going on, and when we have finished the called process, then we jump back into the parent process. Yeah, when to use sub-process or call activities? Well, apparently if you want to split up large process models, then it's clear that that can be helpful to make it more manageable. But also when you have several modelers, several people working on a large process model, then it's better to break it up, because you can edit the different called processes separately rather than several people working on the same model. So that can be helpful. And it also supports reuse. We could call the same process from another process as well. So if we have parts of a process that should be reused, they can be put into a called process. Well, and then you can also abort an entire process that is called from another process. So here in this example, I have added an attached message event. So if a message arrives here when a prepare proposal is executed, then it will be aborted entirely. So the entire call process will be aborted in that case. So you don't need to define for every task in the sub-process that it can be aborted if you get a cancel message or something like that. But you just need to define that here in the parent model, and you just attach this event. And when this event happens and is triggered, then this exception flow will be followed rather than the original flow. So that can also be a reason to define a called process. Yeah, and finally, you can have multiple instances of such a process. For example, you can execute the sub-process for each element of a list. And in order to do this, we can use loops or multi-instance activities. So here's an example for a loop. So you have a little symbol of a loop. So here we have a process model for creating a text, and text is written first and then it will be published. And here we also have a sub-process for writing the text. It's drafted and then it's reviewed and so on. So only very little examples. Yeah, here we have that sign, the symbol that it's a loop. And the comment here says, repeat that while it's not ready. While the text is not ready, it will be worked on, and the activity, so in this case, the whole called process will be repeated many times, possibly. And we need to define a condition for that. So here we have that condition. Here is the exact definition. So there's a status attribute, and when this doesn't contain the value ready, then the activity will be repeated. So actually, I think this is not so exciting, because we could also do without that symbol, because this is equivalent to the second model here. So when we write the text, we can have a gateway and decide if it's ready or not, and if it's not ready, we jump back. So basically, it's doing the same thing, and you can decide what style you want to use. The model at the top is a bit more compact, but yeah, here you see the sequence flow a little better. What I find more interesting is the multi-instance activity. We have that here with 3 little lines. And in this example, we have an order, some process doing something with orders. So at the beginning, we capture an order, and such an order has many order items. And here we have a task, check order item, that handles one item each time it's carried out. So, and this here basically says we need to do this for each order item. So here I show the execution. So this is our order, and we have a list here of order items. We could add another order item, and now we see check order item should be carried out for each element in that list. And here we see Bonita has created 4 tasks in the task list, and we see this is item number 1, item number 2, and so on. So there's one task for each list item, and those tasks can now be executed in any order. So for example, here we say item number 2 is not approved, item number 4 will be approved, and so on. So we need to do this for all 4 tasks here. And when the last of these tasks has been finished, then the process will continue with the review order with the final task here. And here in that task, we see the list again with the approval status, which has been set by each of the instances of check order item. Yeah, what are the advantages also compared to a loop? The advantage is we have separate tasks for handling items of a list. So it's not just one task. In some cases, it may be useful to have one task with the list again, but if it's useful to have different tasks or one task for one item, then we can use the multi-instance activity. And compared to a loop, we can process these list items in any order. If we had a loop, we could do this also with a loop, then it's a strict sequence. So we start with item number 1 and then item number 2 and so on, but we can't change this. So if we are not sure about item number 2, then and we need to get any other information or something like that for that, we can't just go on with the others in the meantime, but we need to stick to the order. So in this case, with a multi-instance activity, we don't need to do that. So that means also that we can process these list items in parallel. So for example, if we have different users working on these different items, then that can be done in any order by different users and also in parallel. And we can use this also for sub-processes or called processes, as we have seen or as we have used in the first example. So we can do this for tasks, but also for sub-processes. So we have multi-instances of entire sub-processes. So here we see how the list is in Bonita assigned to such a multi-instance activity. So we have defined that's a parallel multi-instantiation, and it creates instances from a list. And this list is, if you know Java, you can have just a Java list here. Actually, I have here a technical task that copies this from, I have defined a business object for orders with that list inside, and I cannot access this list directly. Therefore, I copy the items into a separate list, and this list is then assigned to this multi-instance task. And in the multi-instance task, in order to capture the data, we have here a data element or a variable, a local variable, current order item that can be used in any of these tasks, of any of these instances of this task. And we could also store the output results, but here again I have basically a reference so that the information is already available, and I don't need to copy this to another variable or so. So let's come to the third topic, which is message flow and process collaboration. You may have seen process models like this. You have two different partners, two different companies, a buyer and a seller here, and the buyer has a process. They create a request and send the request to the seller, and so on. The seller creates a quotation, sends it back, etc., etc. This is a nice model, and it also reflects how two partners work together. Each partner has his own process, and they exchange messages. But the question is, well, different business partners usually don't use a common BPM system. I can model this in Bonita, and I can run this in Bonita and can execute this, but usually you don't have the situation that they use a common system. They are independent companies, so every company has their own system. So, but does it also make sense to have a collaboration with message flows within an enterprise? And I think the answer is yes. So here I have modeled a little example where we have a business department and an IT department, and the business department creates a request for a new user account, right? We want to have user accounts from the IT department for an ERP system or something like that. And the business department has its own process, and the IT department has its own process. And when the business department has created an account request, it sends this message to the start message event of the IT department's process, so that a new instance of this process is created. Right? In order to define this, we need to define the target pool, which is this one. We need to define the target element, which is this start element, and we can define which data are sent with a message. So we have the fields of the message, and values are copied from the process attributes into these fields of the message. So here we see what needs to be defined for the start event. Basically, you define what happens with the fields of the message, with the values here. They are copied into a business variable in this case, so that this process has access to the data from the message, and then they can check request and so on. So when we run this process several times, we have several instances of this process request user account. And since we then send a message, that means for each instance of the top process, one instance of the second process create user account is created via this message flow to the start event. So here we see that in the execution. So 3 requests have been sent, 3 instances of the top process have been created. And so that means we have 3 instances of this second process. And here we see in the task list the tasks for each instance here. And now when we send back the message, the processing confirmation, then we must make sure that the answer message is assigned to the correct instance of request user account. So when they demanded a user account for Fiona, then the answer should go to the same process instance that has dealt with Fiona's request and not the other one with Bob's request. And in order to achieve that, the most simple way is that you use a correlation key. So here we have a request ID that actually has been provided by the original process in the first message. But here it says, well, this is a unique ID that will be used for correlating the message. So that means that it's assigned to the right process instance. And here we see the receiving message. So here we have defined the correlation, and this is the correlation key. And what needs to be done for this correlation? The value of this key must be compared to the respective value in the process data of request user account. And only in this instance where this has the same value will accept this message and will process it. So what are the advantages of collaborations using message flow? I mean, I could have modeled the same thing without different process and pools and messages, only with one pool and separate lanes. But why could it be useful to do it like this? And the answer is the advantage is that we have loose coupling, which is always desirable in software engineering. So that means each process can be developed and changed separately. So this is useful when we have different responsibilities. So if we had one organizational unit that are responsible for the entire thing, then it could have been useful to have one process. But when you have different departments and each department is responsible for their own process, then it can be useful to have separate processes that communicate via message flow. So that means each process can be developed and changed separately. Only the message flows must be agreed upon, right? So as long as the messages that are exchanged and their contents and so on are the same, then I can change anything in that process and the other process is not affected, and vice versa. Yeah, this also helps us for reuse. So this process could also communicate with another process instead of the top process here, if it supports the same message exchange protocol. Therefore, it's also useful for reuse. Well, I've said this already for sub-processes or called processes. The difference is in the called process, you just have the call and then the return at the end. And here you have well, many messages that you can exchange, not only at the beginning and the end of another process, but also in between. So you can have very powerful and large protocol of many different messages. Yeah, and finally, this also can be used for separating different concerns, which is also another principle in software architecture. So for example, we could use that for separating business concerns and technical aspects in separate processes. For example, that we have one process which is a real business process, which is also modeled and understood by the business people. What are they doing, and the users, what are they doing with the process, and all technical stuff like integration with external systems and how to call these systems, and when there's an error that you send the request again and things like that. That are technical details which are not interesting to the business users, and this means we can hide them basically in a second process, and this is only relevant for IT people. And that also means that if, for example, the integration with the other systems changes, technical protocols change or things like that, then you can also handle this in such a technical process without affecting the original business process. So let's come to the conclusion. I think these three examples have shown again that BPMN is a very powerful modeling notation. When I first encountered these different concepts, I found them interesting and so on. But the more I use them actually for creating executable process models, the more I can admire how powerful it is, because I can really model many very useful and complex situations. So I just can encourage everyone to learn and make use not only of the simple BPMN concepts, but also the more sophisticated BPMN concept for enhancing your automated processes. So if you want to have further information, you will find it on my blog. Well, actually, it's a German blog, but I have also some English posts. If you just use English here, /English, then you will find these examples, and you will find the examples and models to download. Also for the three examples I've shown here in this presentation. They will also be provided on the Bonita community website. One of these models is already there, but the others will be provided there as well. And I also have created a few videos explaining these examples and some more examples in some more detail. You can find them on YouTube on the playlist. You will find it if you use my name there. Yeah, and for learning BPMN, you may want to have a look into my BPMN book, which is available in English and German, and there are also some other German books. If we have German people watching the webinar, this may be useful for you as well. So thank you for your attention, and maybe you have some questions we can discuss now in the questions and answers.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Thomas. So there was a question like, what would you recommend to learn more on BPMN? But I think you already answered that. So your book, your playlist on YouTube, and your website as well, with your blog posts in English or in German.
Yeah, and use BPMN, right? Try to define your own models, use the examples and change them, and so this really helps getting a deep understanding. Not only the simple elements, right? Some people say, well, BPMN, we only use a small part of this. There are some 60 different types of events, and that's too complicated. And so, no, it's not. If you really use them, you will find that it's not too difficult, but it's very useful.
We have another question. It's regarding the message flow and process collaboration. What happens if the message is not received on availability or network problems?
Yes. Well, in my example, I have argued that you can use message flow also within a company. So if you have that just in one process engine, the problem is not that strong as it is if you have a network in between and so on. But what you can do is you can also model timeouts and things like that in BPMN. So that would help for that. And if you actually had message flows between different companies, you wouldn't just model this in one process engine, but you had some other means of communication, and then you could use, if I just have explained, message flow that you have one business process and one technical integration process, and you would handle this also in this integration process in the technical part of the whole collaboration.
Thanks, Thomas. We have still 2 more questions, and I think it's going to be the last 2 questions because yeah, it's already almost time. So let me read it for you. So, Professor, I love BPMN, but why use process when the solution can be developed in a language like Python, Django? Why and when to use business process? What is the added value?
Yeah, of course, it's also possible to define business process support just by plain programming. The added value is, for example, if you have long-running processes, you have things that are provided by a process engine, like they have a management of the state of the process. So, for example, if you have to wait for other partners and things like that, you have monitoring capabilities, you have things like an audit trail, and you always get that with that process engine. Or you can do things like just defining a new version of a process, and you don't need to stop the engine or so. You just can deploy it, and you can in the running system, and then you can use the new version of the process. And if you need these things, these features, then it's useful to have a process engine, because otherwise you need to program everything yourself. So and you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't program your own database, for example, because there are so many database systems out there, and the same with process engines. So if you have very simple things, it may be an option to program that entirely in Python or so. But if you need these features, then use a process engine, and then you can use BPMN. And what is also an advantage is the graphical modeling with BPMN, that you also can discuss this very good with your business users, and because the model is already that what is actually executed.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, can you show again the YouTube address, please? We will put all the information on the community website of Bonita Soft. So yeah, you will have as well as the examples, which are completely executable on Bonita. So you can try them out and use them as the models for your own processes.
Yeah, and I'm also only using the community edition. So it's but you can just execute them in the community edition.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Again, thank you again for coming for this presentation on advanced concepts. And thank you all as well from France, from Germany, from Italy. We have already someone from Michigan in the US. A very international session today. And I hope that you have learned, as me, the subprocesses, calling activities, loops, multi-instance activities, message flows, and process collaboration. So if you want to know more, then tomorrow we have a process analytics session, so don't hesitate. And if you're in Madrid, it's on Thursday, our Bonita Day. So yeah, so a lot of things happening on this month. Thank you again, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.